It's December the 27th, and this is a talk for the Boathouse Church in Putney in London. On the last Sunday of the year, that at last 2020 is almost done. And the title for this talk is New Year, New Disappointment. And you might have kind of thought, why that? Why don't we have a talk on New Year, New Dreams, New Year, New You, or New Year, New Look? Something a bit more upbeat. But I thought actually it's important that we talk about disappointment, because if we only anticipate the happy excitement that a new year might bring, then it won't be good for us, that we might be a bit like an overinflated balloon that at any minute is going to go pop. It also wouldn't be good for others, that our influence and witness on the world might be out of touch. Because if we're honest, as Christians, we don't always have a reputation for being realistic, and particularly for being realistic about the downsides of life, the struggles, the disappointments. Let me give you an example. A really good friend of mine called Dan, and we've been mates since university. I remember years ago inviting him for the first time to some kind of Christian event, because the Christian Union of our university were hosting an evening talk with a question and answer by some famous Christian speaker, designed to get people interested in the Christian tradition and to make people think about coming to church and trying it out. And I remember that the day I asked Dan whether he wanted to come and check out this event, I thought he would be really up for it, because he was quite a chatty, articulate, intelligent, interested guy who liked to debate. But he graphically told me where I could shove that invite to that event, simply because he said he's met enough Christians already on campus, and he's met a lot of Christians from the Christian Union, and he's met enough to know that Christianity is not for him. So I naturally kind of pushed back and said, what do you mean? And how can you say that? And he said, well, it's not that the Christians he met were offensive or were rude or were arrogant or pushy or even because they were weird. What had put him off was that the Christians he had met through the Christian Union were naive, were cheerful and happy but unrealistic and unable to connect and relate to his everyday life, which at that time was full of a lot of struggles and difficulties. And at first I was kind of offended, but on second thoughts I actually thought there's probably a lot of truth in that. Maybe we aren't that good at connecting with people's everyday experience of disappointment and struggles and hurts and pain. So for our own sake and for the sake of others, we need to have a realistic approach to disappointment. Because if there's one thing that 2020 has taught us, it's that life is full of ups and downs, of fulfillments and disappointments. I mean, I'm even recording this from self-isolation, having tested positive for this virus. Life is full of disappointments, and we need to be ready for them. And to do that, I thought we would look at the book of Proverbs from the Bible, and actually just one proverb from the book of Proverbs, which is a book designed to help us to be realistic. One theologian puts it that the book of Proverbs is there to help us to deal with the world as it actually is, not the world that we want or that we imagine, or the world that that's the caricature that we see on the media or on news agencies, but the world as it actually is. So I'm just going to say the proverb. It's probably not worth looking it up. It's just one sentence. This is it. Proverbs 13 verse 12. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. When we first hear that, we might think, nice but obvious. We might think, well, isn't that just stating common sense? We know that life has ups and downs, isn't that all it's saying? But that's not all it's saying, and to think that is to miss the whole point of Proverbs, of what a proverb is. So let's pause for a moment and think what a proverb is and what it's for. Proverbs is like the Bible's Twitter account. It's full of tweets from about chapter 10 onwards, and each tweet is a proverb, a little saying, which is short and small, but it captures something big and deep, like a crystal that's small, but within that small thing is something deep and beautiful, a crystallization of a big process. So Proverbs aren't intended to be a description of the landscape of our circumstances. They're intended to be a picture of the landscape of our hearts. Proverbs aren't supposed to be historically true. They're intended to be experientially true. They don't describe an account of a real event so much as an account of real experience. So if we think that this proverb is simply saying life has ups and downs, or circumstances are good or bad sometimes, we've missed it. Let's go through this proverb again. It didn't say hope gets deferred, longings get fulfilled. It's emphasizing the impact of that on us, on our life world, on the world inside, the mark that things make on us. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. So the stuff that we long for, plan for, aim for, wish for, really look forward to, when it doesn't work out because it's cancelled, it's postponed, or because of lockdown, or maybe it does happen, but it's just not what we had imagined it would be. That isn't something we just shrug off and move on. It's something that affects us, that leaves its mark on us. A bit like people who spend their life under the African sun and their skin ends up kind of worn and weary and creased. In the same way, when we spend our lives under disappointment, our soul ends up kind of worn and weary, creased up. Hope deferred affects us. It makes the heart sick. And in contrast to that, when our desires are fulfilled, a longing fulfilled, is a tree of life, and a tree of life is a picture of human flourishing in every sense. So Proverbs isn't there to describe the landscape of our circumstances, but the landscape of our heart. And what is that landscape? It's ups and downs. Sometimes hope deferred makes the heart sick. Other times longings fulfilled are a tree of life. I thought in this talk we'd essentially take 4 steps. Firstly, we'd look at the proverb. Secondly, we'll explore how the proverb about disappointment relates to us and resonates with our experience. Thirdly, we'll look at how we can be unrealistic about disappointment. And finally, fourthly, we'll look at how we can be realistic about disappointment. Firstly, proverb, which we've looked at. Secondly, we'll explore how it resonates with our experience. Thirdly, unrealistic. Fourthly, realistic. So let's play with how does this proverb about disappointment connect to our experience of disappointment? Well, probably the most famous depiction of what disappointment feels like is from the ancient Greeks. It's from Greek mythology, where there was supposedly this guy called Tantalus, who was a king, and supposedly the god Zeus wanted to punish King Tantalus. And in this myth, Tantalus's punishment in the Greek version of hell was to stand in a beautiful pool of crystal clear water under a beautiful tree full of fruit. And obviously to you and I, that does not sound like a punishment. That is a reward, especially if it's in Greece. But back to the story, it was a punishment for Tantalus, because every time he crouched down to scoop up some water to quench his thirst, the water disappeared. The stream, the pool disappeared. Every time he looked up and reached out to grab some fruit to satisfy his hunger, the branch disappeared. So poor King Tantalus was continually tantalized. Every time he reached out for something that he desired, his hand would come back empty. It was torture for him. It was agonizing. It was hurtful. Hope deferred made his heart sick in this myth. And clearly that's not historically true, it's just a myth, but it can be experientially true. We can connect to that. That is kind of true in our experience. It's true in the sense that a novel can have a lot of truth in it, that Jesus' parables about fictional people can be true. The Good Samaritan is a true parable experientially, even though it might not be about a specific person. And how about us in today's world? If we're saying that disappointment was really part of life for the ancient Greeks, what about us? How does disappointment make our hearts sick? Well, looking back on our lives, right from the start, we probably have moments where there were disappointment throughout our childhood, throughout our upbringing. There were ups and there were downs, and those downs leave their mark on us. Presumably that's why the psychiatrists keep going back there to explain us. What was your childhood like? Maybe we're grown up and we're starting to question how our parents did things and why they brought us up in certain ways. Maybe we're starting to feel a bit disappointed about that, questioning it. And a bit like Oscar Wilde said famously, children begin by loving their parents. After a time, they judge their parents. And rarely, if ever, do they forgive their parents. In other words, disappointment is real, including in our upbringing. And we've got to deal with that because it leaves its mark on us. And not just in family and in upbringing, but also our friends and family. The relationships that are supposed to be the most joyful can also be the most disappointing to us. It almost seems to me like there's an equal and opposite reaction, that to every up there's a down. Every new friendship, every new relationship, and the joy of developing it is matched by the pain and disappointment of losing it, either through misunderstanding and fallout, breakup, or through distance, or through death and bereavement. Everything goes up, comes down. Same with religion, same with church, right? We might think, oh no, church can't possibly be disappointing, but it is, right? Especially when we're relating to each other now through this tedious screen. And again, ups and downs. In fact, one theologian says that religions can disappoint by failing to go up or failing to come down. Just as Moses went up a mountain to meet with God and then down to meet with people, religions can fail us, can disappoint us by failing to bring us up to have an encounter with God, or failing to bring us down and relating to real life, to our world of work and everyday experience. Maybe that's how we feel sometimes about church. We don't always have or consistently have a meaningful encounter with God, or a meaningful integration and application of our faith to real life and work, etc. We might be disappointed with government and feel like we're not sure how decisions are made sometimes, or why they're made in a certain way. We might be disappointed with our community and society, thinking that things need to change and modernize. There's so much injustice around the place. Or maybe the rate of change is too fast and we feel like political correctness has gone mad. Social justice movements are leaving us dizzy and spinning, not knowing which way is up, and we're left living in this place where we feel like we live here but we don't belong here. And it's disappointing. So we can be disappointed by all kinds of things, and you know better than me what disappointments there are in your life, and there have been in 2020. So what are we going to do about this? As the proverb has said, life has ups and downs, and disappointments affect us. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. And we've seen that just as that was true in the experience of the ancient Greeks, it's true for us still today. In a moment, we're going to play with a way that we can be realistic, or explore a way we can be realistic about disappointments. But before we do that, let's explore two ways I think we can be unrealistic about the disappointments of real life. The first way is to take the whole spectrum of human emotion and ignore the negative half and only look on the bright side of life. Optimism. Optimism is a blinding lie, because instead of taking the whole range of human experience, we blind ourselves deliberately to one half. And if we're British, or at least living in this British culture, optimism might actually come naturally, because it's expected of us that in everyday conversation we'll more often speak about easy, light-hearted, happy things, pleasant things, than about difficult, painful, heavy things. It's almost like we have to end every topic on a positive before we can move on. Every conversation comes wrapped in optimistic wrapping paper. But the Bible says that's not how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be realists, because we're to, yes, rejoice with those who rejoice, but also mourn with those who mourn, weep with those who weep. Take the full range of human experience, don't halve it. So that's one way we can be unrealistic about the disappointments of life, optimism. Second way is intellectualism. If optimism takes the range of human emotion, cuts out the disappointing half, intellectualism takes the range of human emotion and gets rid of the whole lot and ignores desires and vulnerability and disappointments, and instead is preoccupied with ideas and beliefs, opinions, viewpoints. We might think that as Christians we're immune from that, surely, because we talk about love and stuff. But I wonder if actually we're more prone to intellectualism than others. After all, we talk about ourselves as believers and others as unbelievers, and we talk about Christianity as a worldview. So we're clearly obsessed or very, very concerned with ideas, beliefs and views. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it is a bad thing if we are preoccupied with that to the extent that we fail to acknowledge emotion, desires, vulnerabilities, brokenness, struggles and disappointments of everyday life. Let me give you an example. A friend of ours was out, this is years ago, but was out on a first date with a Christian guy who seemed like a really decent bloke, and they were chatting over dinner. She was talking about what matters to her, what gets her going, what she's passionate about. One thing that she's very passionate about is helping victims of human trafficking. And she was saying to this guy how she's so excited that she's recently got involved with meeting and helping women and children who have been used as sex objects in the sex trade, and told a couple of these stories and emphasized how heartbreaking she finds it. But she was surprised and confused that this guy didn't seem to give her much back. There was no real echoing of her emotions. He just seemed blank. So she pushed a little further and said she finds it so tragic and incredible that in today's day and age, people are still made to live like slaves. And she thought, let me leave it there, see what this guy makes of that. And to her shock, he kind of paused and said, yeah, but as a Christian, I think that the only kind of slavery that we should really be bothered by is mankind's slavery to sin and the need to liberate people from that by the proclamation of the gospel message. At which point she literally stood up, told him he had a heart of stone, and she left the restaurant. I'm not saying that to be amusing, actually. I'm saying that as a tragic picture of what we can be like as Christians, that we can sometimes be like this bloke who had a head so full of theology that he couldn't relate to people on a human level. His head was so full of ideas and beliefs and doctrine that he was unable to sympathize and connect with the disappointments of everyday life. In other words, he was too busy being intellectual to love his neighbor. And that's embarrassing. It's hypocritical that we are claiming to follow Jesus, the Word made flesh, whilst behaving like we are the flesh made Word, and always if we only talk about beliefs and proclamation and ideas and doctrines, and forget to do something about that and to connect emotionally with the hurts and struggles and disappointments of everyday life. So those are two ways that we can be blind to the disappointments of everyday life and the impact that that has on us, either by optimism or by intellectualism. And that's a problem, because if we are unrealistic about the disappointments of our life, then other people will never really know us. They'll only know the persona that we put on. They'll never get to know our deep disappointments inside of us, and ultimately we'll feel unknown. And if other people are like that and only show us optimism and intellectualism and don't show us honestly the disappointments that affect them, then going to church will become a little bit like tuning into social media, like logging into Facebook or Instagram, and all we see is other people's beautiful and perfect lives. And all we're left with is a deeper sense of our own disappointment and loneliness in that disappointment. So we need to be realistic about the impact that disappointments have on our day-to-day life, for our sake and for the sake of others. So our fourth and final step today then is to think how then, instead of being unrealistic, can we have a realistic approach to next year and to today, to the disappointments that affect us. Well, let's go back to our proverb, because we've only skimmed through it, really. Let's pay a little bit more attention to the wording, because there's a clue in this proverb as to what a realistic approach is to the disappointments of life. Let me say it again. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. And listen to that phrase, tree of life, because it's a bit surprising, isn't it? It would have been easier for the author, presumably King Solomon, to have said, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled makes the heart well. If King Solomon had hung out with us in our kinds of churches, he might have written something like, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is really great, or really helpful, or something kind of bland, tame, lame, like that. Nice, might be true, but not very profound. But instead, the author has gone out of his way to say a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. And if you know the Bible as a whole story, you'll know that the tree of life is an image that's right at the start of the Bible in creation, the first two chapters, and right at the end of the Bible, new creation, the last two chapters. So to talk about a tree of life is like a reminder that we're not there yet. Tree of life is future, when Jesus returns and restores this place to working order, back to perfection, how things are meant to be. The problem with optimism, intellectualism, is that they're pretending that human flourishing is here now, that we're doing just fine right now. And that's unrealistic. A realistic approach is to wait and to know that there are problems now, but human flourishing, things will be all right in the future. The tree of life is future. You might find that persuasive, or you might find that disappointing and say, actually, hang on a minute. If you're saying that hope deferred makes the heart sick, surely Christianity is like the ultimate deferral of hope, because you're saying everything will be all right in the end, in the future, just hang on. Isn't that the ultimate deferral? And lots of people have said this. People have said that just because Christian faith in the afterlife works and helps doesn't make it true. It could still be an illusion. Just because it psychologically works doesn't make it true. That's what Nietzsche and Freud said. Just because it's politically useful doesn't make it true. That's what Karl Marx said. It's the opium of the masses. And today, the famous Jewish atheist author Yuval Noah Harari writes that just because we need stories because they unite us, they bring society together. That doesn't make them true. They could still well be myths. And so just because something is true or works psychologically, politically and socially, like a belief in the afterlife, that doesn't make it true. It could just be wishful thinking. Isn't that what Christianity is like? I really like questions and challenges like that, because we need them to remind us how and why we need the Christ. Because when we think of Jesus Christ, we see someone who is future, who is coming in the future to restore this place back to working order. But he's not just future, he's also past. That Jesus has been here historically, and when we look at Jesus' life, we see that he's someone who knows what it's like to be us. He knows disappointment. right from day one, right? We know the story. There was no room in the inn, so they laid him in the manger. And we're so used to that, we kind of think it's sweet, because a little kid might read it at a carol service. They laid him in a manger. But it's disgusting. It's a picture of Jesus' life, rejection and humiliation, that he was put in an animal's feeding trough, which would have stunk. It would have been full of disease, pathogens, bugs, and stench. Yet that was the pattern of Jesus' life. Rejection, humiliation, rejection, humiliation. Right through his upbringing, his childhood, born out of wedlock in a poor family, and then his family rejected him, didn't get him, didn't understand him, thought he was a lunatic. His friends let him down, patronized him, betrayed him, fell asleep when he needed them most the night of his arrest. They denied him, they abandoned him as he was sentenced to death. Jesus was disappointed by religion, organized religion, who weren't concerned with giving people a true encounter with God and being a good influence to society, because they were confronted by the Son of God and instead paid 30 pieces of silver to have him executed and removed. Jesus was disappointed by the government, who didn't give him a fair trial, but instead he was beaten up under police custody, and Pontius Pilate didn't have the courage to stick to his own convictions, just washed his hands of Jesus and didn't care for truth. Jesus was disappointed by society, who preferred to release a criminal, Barabbas, and have Jesus excluded and put to death outside the city gates, hung not on a tree of life, but on a tree of death. Jesus gets disappointment. But Jesus didn't just go to disappointment, he went through disappointment and put disappointment to death, rising again on Easter Sunday to new life, a resurrected life, showing us that there is life beyond the grave, that there is life beyond this life's disappointments. That just as he was raised to new life, a life that is eternal and free from life's disappointments and struggles and pains, so if we follow him, we will follow him through disappointment, through death, and out the other side to a new creation life free of disappointments. The way to the tree of life is through Jesus' tree of death. And the test for us, do we believe that? Do we really know that? Are we followers of Jesus? Is twofold. Firstly, are we realistic about the disappointments of our life and the effect that that has on us? And secondly, are we ready to help those around us who are going through disappointments? Just as Jesus has helped us through disappointment and made a way for us to go through, in the same way, are we ready and helping others around us with their disappointments, helping them go through? If we're not, then we're not following Jesus, we must be following something else. So in summary, we need to be realistic. We need to be realistic about what to expect from the year ahead. We need to be realistic about the disappointments of life and the effects that that has on us. We're tempted to be distracted by optimism and intellectualism, but all that is to take a drink from optimism and intellectualism to take the edge off life. Let's not blind ourselves by that. Instead, let's go with eyes wide open into the new year with a realistic approach, realistic about the disappointments of life. And the way to do that is to follow Jesus, not simply to disappointment, but through disappointment, all the way out to the other side, waiting for the new creation. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life.